Welcome, welcome. My name is Lloyd Borrell. I'm your host. Today, I'm thrilled to have as my guest, Dr. Ellen Kamhi. Dr. Kamhi is a professional member of the American Herbalist Guild. She's a medical school instructor in botanical pharmacology, and she's nationally board certified as a holistic nurse. Dr. Kamhi is recognized as a leader in the herbal nutraceutical industry, and she's the author of 15 books. Dr. Ellen Kamhi, welcome to the EMF Health Summit.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. It's such an important topic.
Thank you. It's a real pleasure to have you on. Now, I'd like to start by asking your story, because I know that this awareness about electromagnetic fields started at an early age. So yeah, quite simply, how did this all start with you?
Well, yeah, I will tell you that when I was a child, I would feel some kind of interference when I went to a mall. And that was like in the 1960s, very early, when they made the first enclosed malls. And whenever I walked in there, I felt very disoriented. I had no idea why, but I just used to tell my mother, I don't want to go to the mall. And she was, what? What kid doesn't want to go to the mall where we buy things? I said, no, I'm not going there anymore. And of course, it wasn't until years later that I figured out in the malls, shopping malls, there's electromagnetic field frequencies, especially when they turn everything off to watch for shoplifters, and they have things on the doors. And, you know, I didn't even know at the time. This was long before cell phones. Remember, Lloyd, cell phones are a new thing. When you're my age, we never had cell phones. Even when my children, who were in their 40s, mid-40s, there was no such thing. So to me, that was a really newer intervention in terms of things that made it worse in terms of electromagnetic fields.
And how did that evolve? So you got this initial uneasiness, let's say, when you were younger, and then, you know, we've moved into this wireless world now, where, you know, everything's wireless. I mean, things we could never imagine now have become wireless. And so how did this evolve? This awareness, you know, did it become a sensitivity, you know, a hypersensitivity? How are you now with this?
Well, I would say sensitivity, because I have many patients who come to me for all kinds of help and natural remedies, using herbs, changing their diet. However, when I found out that what was going on in the mall with electromagnetic field, there were no cell phones, I actually designed my life to be in places that had the least amount possible. So I moved to Bisbee, Arizona, and that's where my children were born. And it's a rather off-the-grid place. Now there's cell phone towers, but they're still minimum. You can still be in a place now where you can be outside of the range of those fields. And I felt so much better then that I started looking into the scientific studies, what scientific studies there were in terms of interference with cell structure and microorganisms in terms of the emanations of electromagnetic fields. So I would say, I thank God that I'm not as sensitive as some people who can never leave their house. They have to live in a box that's trying to feel those waves, which is becoming more and more difficult. I don't know if we're going to go all the way to 5G today, or if you will, within your series, because that's something that should be a massive heads up for those people who are sensitive and for those people who like to stay healthy.
Yes, yes. And we are covering 5G with different guests, and we can just touch on that with you. But so you talked about the science there. What can you say about that? So you had this sensitivity, this initial sensitivity, and this, you know, this motivated you to start doing research. What did you find out? What did you learn?
I'll say a couple of things, and then I'll actually show you a slide of one of the best sites to go to where they keep track of the ongoing studies, which, by the way, are massive and directly linked to cancer. Even the World Health Organization chimes in about that. Yet, what's so amazing is that in more current times, not even with the 5G, which is now, but the 4G, which was a few years ago, 2G, 3G, 4G. Just so people know what that little G means, it has to do with coming in of cell phone potencies, let's say. 2G was the first one, and then they expanded it. Of course, you get better signals with each of the higher numbers. And people asked me to go with them to town hall meetings and other environmental impact study locations to act as a health professional, since I am a PhD RN. I'm associated with the university, I'm a professor, and they asked me to come in and just speak for the town to try to block them putting up those big cell towers. And do you know, this is the case, I'm sure you've heard this. Here in the United States, you are not allowed to offer a discussion about health effects in terms of trying to impede the putting up of these cell towers. Somehow the cell phone companies were able to actually put in legislation early on to disallow the discussion of health effects. Yeah. Isn't that just incredible?
It is incredible, yeah. It's almost as if you're talking about a communist state. And I think the legislation you're referring to is the 1996 Telecommunications Act.
You're right. And so it was long ago. And so I wanted to show that slide. Would now be a good time in terms of
please show.
So I'll bring that up. And so there's not a way to go straight to it, but I will bring it down to that particular study because I think it's really important. This one. So people can look at this. It's the Environmental Health Trust. And they do an amazing job. It's a not-for-profit. You could donate if you'd like to help them. But they are looking at all kinds of effects. This slide here that I'm pulling up is just about cancer. That there is clear evidence, scientific studies, conducted by the U.S. National Toxicology Program. And they did a panel on cell phone radiation. So this is not a guess. This is, we know that there's an increase in cancer because of these cell phone and other radiations. We can talk about microwaves, etc. But basically, it's scary, and it's very unfortunate that we're in a position that in terms of legally, there's very little we can do to impede the advancement of this technology.
Mm. Yeah, and that is a great resource, by the way. The EHT and Lloyd Morgan, electrical engineer, is actually who's a senior science consultant with EHT, is actually on the summit, and yeah, they're really doing some really great work. The Environmental Health Trust. So there is a lot of science out there, and this is what we've been learning through this summit is time and time again is because there is this idea that we need more studies, that there's no science, and it's not clear, and so on and so forth. And yet when we actually really talk about the science and look what science there is an amazing amount of science. And it's not as if we can prove unequivocally that, for instance, cell phones cause cancer, but we don't need to prove that. What they need to prove is that they don't. That's
very good point. And I'd like to bring in 5G here, if I may, because most of us already have 4G. That's kind of what's up and running. But the 5G is coming down the pike. And where I live, they are actually putting up thousands of these new mini 5G boxes. Now, what is 5G? We're up to 4G. Then there's a jump to 5G. But there's something that everyone needs to know, and I think you should call your congresspeople about this. In terms of 5G, it's a whole new technology. There was 2G, 3G, 4G. That was all the same emanation in terms of the disruption of natural fields. But when we get to 5G, we're talking about microwaves. So we're going into a whole new realm. By the way, just what you said, Lloyd, never tested. So you're not even able to bring up anything about possible health effects in terms of trying to stop these, them putting up these towers. Also, they don't need new towers. They've reinvented this technology to where they're using microwave. It's a much higher frequency, ranges more, up to 60, where let's say 5G is about 9 hertz, it's going up to 60. never been tested, not even on cell structures, no health testing, because health testing is not considered relevant in the realm of these devices.
Yeah, and we are going into the unknown a little bit here. We don't even know, because 5G depends where you live as to what, you know, what part of the world you live in. If you're in North America, even what state you live, as to what 5G means, because there are different states are using different frequencies. And yeah, we are really more than ever. It's a voyage into the unknown on this whole subject, because these frequencies have been used previously, but of course they've been used by the military primarily, and so we don't know. There are
they've been used to create pain. They've been used even at the latest games that they played. I forget where it was, but they actually used it to keep boars, wild boars, away from the area when they were doing things that they didn't want them there. So they're very effective to dissuade animals, because they actually cause pain.
Yes.
So we know that. And also, they don't need new poles. So they can just come over in a neighborhood and they'll use trees. They can use older poles that are there already. They can use lights. So it's going up a lot more quickly and with less regulatory oversight.
It is, and it's a big concern. And yeah, you're right to bring this up, the subject of 5G. And people do need to know about this. And as you say, people do need to call their congressman or call their local representative and really speak out about this and start asking questions.
Another one is smart meters. I don't know if you have a whole section on that, but I'll bring that in, because I've had several patients personally who noticed that they got all of a sudden a big change in their life, and they could not link it to anything. We looked at their diet. What it wound up being is that they come from the electric company, they do not ask you, and they change the electric meter on your house to something called a smart meter. Well, if your bedroom is anywhere near that, and by the way, you can measure that with a tri-field meter. I suggest everybody has a tri-field meter. It was very inexpensive. Mine is so old that I used it when my children, who are now in their 40s, that's how old this thing is. So now there's more advanced models. When they were little, I used to show them on here the emanation from the television to make it real to them. And I said, if you want to watch the television, you're going to have to sit back this far. And I put tape on the floor to show them where they could sit. And you can test your microwave to see if it's leaking microwave radiation. And for those people who get smart meters, and it's on the other wall right outside their bedroom, they often get negative health effects from that.
Correct. And there's actually a new model. So just to clarify on the smart meters, people don't know, I think pretty much everybody knows now what a smart meter is, but it's a meter which communicates with the electricity company, or the gas company, or whatever, the utility company, so that the meter guy doesn't have to come out, and it sends information back using electromagnetic frequencies. And it can either be through the power lines, or it can be via radio frequency radiation, a bit like your cell phone. There's different ways it can be. But either way, it's pollution, and either way, it's bad news. Electro pollution is bad news. And yeah, the tri-field there is a great meter. It's not what I recommend now. I have also the tri-field, and there's actually a new model out, and that model is really, it was really ahead of its time, and it was one of the first, what I call consumer meters. So a meter which is easy to use, inexpensive, and also it's a tri-meter. It can measure the three things: the magnetic fields, the electric fields, and the radio frequency radiation. And the new one, just so people know, is the tri-field TF2, and that is really a lot better because it can measure radio frequency radiation with a lot more accuracy. But
of course, those weren't even around when I bought mine, so definitely get the new one.
Well, yeah, I mean, you are a pioneer on this, and obviously through your sensitivity initially when you were younger, and then, yeah, I mean, who had, like a tri-field meter 20 years ago?
Right, or longer, it's true, right.
Yeah, or longer.
But it's really unfortunate because a lot of people feel ill and they don't know why. They go in and all the blood tests show normal. They wind up getting antipsychotic medication or antidepressants, which in the long run really makes them much worse. And they're depressed because they don't feel well, but they don't not feel well just because they're depressed. They're being affected by, of course, nutrition and vitamin deficiencies, but these electromagnetic fields are vastly interfering with health and wellness.
Correct. And it's this kind of hidden menace that is really the problem, is that so few people are aware of it. And yes, it is clearly, very clearly, it has the ability to massively impact our health. But I'd like to just talk about your work more generally. So you are known as the natural nurse. Can you explain just what your philosophy is on health and what you do?
Absolutely. So yes, I'm known as the natural nurse, and that's a registered trademark, by the way. And it comes from someone calling me that in a negative way. When I was a young nurse in 1973, I was working in a hospital, and one of the things I did, by the way, we only had the Merck manual, and we only had a Xerox machine. There was no internet. Remember, guys? Most of you don't remember, but nonetheless. So I used to go in and look at the charts, and I would tell the doctors, and I would go to the Xerox machine and make a copy, say, you're giving people this drug. With this drug, you're not supposed to also use the other drug that you're giving them. And we should be careful of what they're eating. They have a cold or flu. They shouldn't be given dairy because that's going to increase mucus. And I made copies of the actual research, medical research, that I had to go to the library and glean, no internet. And I would put it in the doctor's little cubbyhole mailboxes in the staff room. Do you know they used to smoke cigarettes at the nursing desk in the hospital and in the staff office? The hospital staff and the doctors and the nurses all smoked cigarettes, just to remind you how long ago this was. So I used to put in their mailbox all this stuff about what they're doing, and then I would look at their own lunch, and I would make a copy of the soda pop and all the chemicals that are in there, and then I would put notifications of how toxic those are. So they gave me the name, oh no, here comes the natural nurse. Like, they weren't so happy about that I was coming in because they knew they're going to get all this interference information with what they were doing. So that's what they would say, oh no, here comes the natural nurse. That's where I got that name. I said, you know what, that's a good name. I'm going to trademark it.
So that's the name. So tell me about the philosophy behind the name.
Well, I would say that came through several avenues. Like I said, the electromagnetic fields were one thing, and I found that natural things could help offset that negativity. And also, I had fallen off and hurt my back in a horseback riding accident. And I went to the card catalog, again, not sure you all know what that was, to look up natural remedies to help my back. And I found out about horsetail grass, which is high in silica. I found out about using calcium and magnesium and castor oil packs, all of which I've written books about, by the way, now. I've written 15 books. And I used them, and it helped. It helped. And when I went back to schedule the surgery, I walked in with a list of the interventions I had found that worked. And I thought, the big surgeon would be so excited to know he did not have to do surgery because I had healed my back. He was not excited. He was very unhappy, I picked up. And he moved his glasses down his nose and held the list very far away, like, this thing, smells bad, because I don't want to know it. And what he said is, oh, these are just old wives' tales. I said, well, that could be, but that must mean that the old wives' tales are correct. And he said, no. And they say to this day, they say, some people just spontaneously get better. Now, I knew it wasn't spontaneous. I knew each of those things I tried, castor oil pack, horsetail grass, on and on, magnets I used, actually, North Pole of a magnet, all kinds of things I tried. And I could feel it healing and that set me on my life path. So what I have done ever since that is I travel a lot to indigenous areas of the world. Sometimes we take people along with us as an echo tours for cures. And we interact with some of the ancient modalities, but then I take them to a little further and do scientific inquiry, doing testing in laboratories to see with plants, what are the active constituents? With something like electromagnetic field deflectors, how does that influence the cell structure? So that has really been my life work.
That's fascinating. Electromagnetic field detectors and how that impacts.
Not only detectors, but things that re-regulate and rebalance the electromagnetic field.
Okay.
And I've worked with many of the top scientists. I'll name one, Dr. Glenn Rhine. Dr. Rhine has done some of the best work in how these electromagnetic fields influence cells. And he's done that on cell structures. He's done it on human cells. He's done it on DNA strands. And really looking at the fact that some of these implements that you can purchase, right, that they say help to offset the onslaught of these electromagnetic fields, some of them really don't block them, but what they do is reorganize them so they have less of a negative influence, and you definitely feel better.
So is there any of these devices that you've used or that you recommend to patients?
There are so many, but I have one on some slides, so we can go back to that. There's many more, so I'm not giving this one particularly, let's say, an endorsement, but I am saying that this one really does work very well, and that is something called biosyntony. So the biosyntony are specific devices that were created in France, where they're way ahead in terms of understanding the negative aspects of this. Now, as I said, there are many others. I happen to love this one, and I use it. And of course, then there are natural waves. That's one of the, let's say, arguments from the industry saying, well, there's waves everywhere. There's naturally waves. Yes, but they occur in a vortex kind of shape when they hit you. They actually modulate the body, sometimes in a very positive way, when we're talking about the natural waves that influence our biorhythms and our circadian rhythms. That's already waves, but those are very natural. They bring information to the glands and the organs. Some people might have seen something like chakras. Chakras are kind of an explanation of those energy centers that are influencing our various glands, and they move in that vortex system. Now, what happens here? This is what the EM waves, the kind of waves that we're talking about that are man-made and disruptive to our system. Notice how different they look than the vortex energy waves of naturally occurring waves. So what the biosyntony does, if this would be one of the devices, it does not block them, but it reorganizes them back into that vortex shape. And it definitely makes you feel a lot better. So here's a man-made wave coming in, goes through the biosyntony memory disk, and it comes out being more organized, more like a natural wave. Of course, how this happens, and Dr. Rhine did some experimentation with this, is very much involved with water. When we think about water, you know, we're about 70% water, depending on how old we are. But this is just some of their devices. They have many others, and again, there's loads of other ones on the market. This is my fuse box in my house. So that my husband, Mike, who actually helped set up the lights, he doesn't necessarily believe in any of this because he's not even sensitive, but if it makes me happy, he'll put protection devices on the fuse box, you know? Sometimes husbands are great that way. And this is another thing that they have from biosyntony that you actually have personally on your body. Then this one is an egg that you might use, let's say, in a room or in a house. Let me shut the window. Somebody's having a little noise there. So there are many, many different devices, and you can choose which one works for you. And again, there's lots of other brands of devices. I have found some that really work and some that not so much. So something that might be good to know about is biosyntony. And then we can talk about essential oils.
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah, so and that's great information. And what I'd just like to qualify that by saying is that what is important is that first you do the conventional EMF protection, that's to say what Dr. Ellen started off by showing us with the meter, and understanding what these different frequencies you are trying to deal with, identifying hotspots with your EMF meter or meters, and then using the device or other
Any number of them.
yeah, as an adjunct to this conventional approach. So that's I just want to say that, so because that is the danger with these kind of different new technologies, is that people rely on that and they throw everything else out the window, and they're using the cell phone 8 hours a day, and they're sleeping in the Wi-Fi, and etc. and etc.
Those are really good recommendations, of course. Like, turn off the Wi-Fi completely at night so you're not inundated with it. And do you know, in China, Lloyd, they actually have special material which has metal. It's actually manufactured with silver and gold. It's made into clothes, and Chinese women who are pregnant must wear garments made out of this if they're working in an office, because of that's how well recognized it is in other countries.
Yeah.
So you're so right. Take every precaution you can just to decrease the possibility of it affecting you negatively.
Absolutely. And so you give us we saw your slide there on essential oils. So I'd like to ask you about that. It leads us nicely into that topic. So perhaps if you could just tell us, what are essential oils for people who are not familiar with this subject, and in what way can they be used as a form of EMF protection?
Well, that would be great. So let's see if we can get back to slide screen so I can show this to people. I don't know if I have to keep opening it up. Would it be that, oh, I could just go to it right here. Great. So essential oils and EMF protection. Are you able to see that now?
No, I can't see that.
Okay. So, so we have to get, okay. So we'll have to, I'm not sure what we do now. Okay, so we'll go back here, and this you should be at, whoops, screen sharing has failed.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Don't worry. We'll do it without the screen sharing.
Okay. Well, I'd love to get to those slides because they really, really are excellent. I think what happened is that they're not in, so we can, let's see if we can find them. Because there's certain aromatherapy oils that are really, really helpful. And one would be lavender, and another would be rose. So they would be something that you definitely may want to look into. And with those kinds of things as well, you
so
definitely...
if I could just say, oh, here we go.
Yeah,
yeah, I can see your screen now, yeah.
Okay,
so if you could just clarify, what essential oils are, how are they, what is it exactly? You could just
right, so essential oils are made from plants. You able to see it now?
I can, yes.
Okay, so we'll go back to the essential oil. Thank you for your patience. So essential oils are made by taking plants and distilling out the active constituents. When we do herbal medicine, and I teach many classes, by the way, in how to be certified as an herbalist with the national organization in the United States, which is the American Herbalist Guild. And that's a recognized certification as being a qualified herbalist. Now, herbs can be used many ways. One is to make a tea. You can eat the plants directly. We do a lot of classes in outside identification, making tinctures. You can buy tinctures in the store. And another way to process plants is through distillation. And that actually gets out different chemicals. And it's usually done on highly aromatic compounds. That's why it's also called aromatherapy, because you're getting usually quite a delicious scent. In the two that we're talking about now, these do have a very, very nice scent. But what's important about them is not that they're specific for electromagnetic fields, but these are two that lift the spirit and also help with that vibratory rate. Remember, we talked about the interference in the vibrational field of these electromagnetic waves. So when we're looking at some of these plants, rose, for instance, when they measure it, has a very high frequency of 320. Well, that's interesting, right? Because what do we think of roses? We think of them in terms of love, right? We think of using them for that way. By the way, the ancients, when we look at folklore, knew about that as well, because rosary beads are made from roses. And I actually have a recipe of how to do that in my book called Cycles of Life, how to take rose petals and make them into rosary beads for protection, but they were for spiritual protection. Of course, they didn't have these big electromagnetic fields then, but they still knew that rose was able to balance the energy field. I find that so interesting. And lavender is another high frequency and highly available oil. But again, you want to get high quality. There are things that, if they're really inexpensive, they're probably just made with some chemicals like artificial flavor. They use artificial scent. So you want to get a real quality essential oil. So as we said, rose, of course, that's very strong and floral and sweet. And there's various extraction methods like steam distillation that we talked about. That would be a really great one to consider. And also lavender. Look again at the spirituality of lavender. When we look at, let's say, the chakra system, and we're talking about something called the violet or the violet flame, boy, oh boy, lavender is in itself like a violet flame. And it has this very fresh and balancing aroma. So that would be a nice thing to put on your pillow at night, see which one you like. That would be helpful. Not that it blocks the electromagnetic field, but it allows your own immune system to deal with it a little bit more effectively.
Mm.
And we could go on to herbs now if you'd like, or I could give you
okay. Please, yeah, let's talk about herbs.
So
yes,
we'll just continue a little bit into herbs. There are so many herbs that are extremely helpful with helping to balance the electromagnetic field. For instance, anything that has iodine in it, because that supports the thyroid, which is a gland that is impacted negatively through these fields. Now, in one of the books I wrote, which is called The Natural Medicine Chest, I do have an entire chapter in there about wheatgrass and how to use wheatgrass specifically. Now, this I knew about so long ago that I used to grow trays of wheatgrass, put it, and I still do now, put it between myself and the computer. And they have measured the fact that wheatgrass can actually deflect electromagnetic fields. They did, I'm sure all of you in science class did, where you put the magnet down and you put the iron filings on it and you can see them spread out in a particular direction. That is how some of this research is done with the electromagnetic fields generated by these negative things we're talking about today, 4G, 5G, smart meters, cell phone towers. I mean, we're surrounded, we're bathed in it. We're bathed in it. And so having actually wheatgrass growing around you can help to deflect it. You can drink it as well. We use a hand juicer, but it's not like the more you drink, the more protected you are. Even just having that grass growing helps, but you need to have it growing right in your house. And we give instructions on how to grow your own in the Natural Medicine Chest. There's many other ways you can find out. So that's a good one to have. Another really great one is yellow dock root. Now, we go out and collect our own yellow dock roots when we're doing herb classes. It's easy to find in most places, not in Florida where I live most of the year, but here where I am in New York area now, you can find it. I can look outside and it's going to be growing everywhere. Yellow dock root is very good for detoxification, and it's very high in a lot of components that help cells deflect any kind of negative ions. And by the way, these things break ions, they cause the development of free radicals. So this is one of the ways we would use yellow dock. By the way, we would use yellow dock if someone has to go get an x-ray, because there's another insult with another band of electromagnetic fields when you have to go get x-rays. Myself and my children, no dental x-rays, not never. I'll get a dental x-ray if my dentist says, this tooth, I need to see what's going on there. And I go, yeah, it does hurt a little. I'll get one dental x-ray. Maybe it's been 10 years since I got one. I never would go and get a whole mouthful twice a year. Why? I personally, I'm not telling you what to do, I personally have never had a mammography. Never had a mammography. Neither has my mom, and she's 89 years old. Not that we don't get tested. We get thermography. We also get regular sonogram diagnostics. And also, we don't genetically have a line of having an issue with it. So you have to take that into consideration when you decide. But just in terms of getting useless x-rays, I'm not a fan of that. On the other hand, as a nurse, I would say x-rays are fantastic when needed. You know, they're great. Somebody has a broken bone, you definitely want to see where the break is, but I just think they're overused and abused for billing purposes rather than for health purposes. But when you're going, very, very good to get some yellow dock root. Even taking a bath in it can chelate out both heavy metals and things like electromagnetic radiation. You can take a yellow dock root and ground it, or if you don't know how to find one, buy it in the health food store. You can buy it already ground. We put it in the little stocking women wear, knee highs, and put that on the faucet of a bathtub. Run very hot water through it, and then you can tie that off and use it as you would use a loofah. And that actually helps to bring out and relieve a lot of the excess that's been caused by radiation. Another thing is yellow dock root. You notice it's a little yellow when you dig it out. That has to do with the chemical components, one of which is iron. Yellow dock root is an excellent form of iron. If you are taking iron, read your bottle. Even if you're pregnant, if you're taking a kind of iron that's often prescribed, unfortunately, by physicians, which is called ferrous sulfate, that is not a good form of iron. That's a form of iron that causes some of the adverse effects associated with iron. And also it causes the Fenton reaction, and I won't go into that now, but basically it causes the development of more free radicals, what you don't want. Instead, yellow dock root is an excellent form of iron, very, very safe, well absorbed. And here's a picture of what the plant looks like in the wild. It grows almost everywhere. It's antioxidant, antifungal, antibacterial, has various ways to help your body protect itself from all kinds of inflammation and disease. It's very high in vitamins A, B, C, manganese, phosphorus, calcium, iron, magnesium, and sodium. And everything's edible about that plant if you can learn to use it. So this is a wonderful plant for the EMF story. And when we're talking with our plants like I do, teach a lot about plant communication, which by the way is being very well studied right now. And you might feel like that whole energetic interchange between yourself and plants is something that many people can feel, or between other species like your pets, your companion animals, your dogs and your cats. And you go, I don't know, I feel like I'm communicating with them. Well, science has proven that in fact you are. So there's so much to the transference of these fields, both positive and negative. And of course, what we want to do is really promote the establishment of healthy fields and decrease this onslaught of artificial negative fields.
Yeah. Great information there, and I love what you're saying about the communication with plants, and I can certainly identify with that because it's some, and it's just something which has really evolved for me personally. And we've been living here, same house for like 20 years, but the garden's been there, but it's only the last, 4 or 5 years or so on that we've started to grow our own vegetables and so on and so forth, and have more of a when we first moved in, it was like I wanted the perfect lawn, and then I realized it wasn't going to happen where I lived with the climate and the soils and everything, and I was trying to beat nature somehow, and so I grew out of that, and this communication interaction with plants is just so important. And as you say, it's a question of disconnect, reconnect. So we disconnect from all these as much as possible from these harmful man-made frequencies, and we reconnect to these, fundamental natural frequencies of the earth and the plants
And really, even walking on the dirt barefoot, it has a new name now. I think it's called earthing, right? I lecture at these conferences sometimes with a lot of people that are younger, and I love them, and they're coming up with these new names. Like we do the Imagine Music and Arts Festival. That's going to be in Orcas Island, which is a wonderful place. And we used to call it something else, but now it's called earthing, I believe. And that actually is helpful, because when you're walking on the earth, it pulls a lot of these negative electromagnetic fields off you. So it's such a wonderful practice instead of always being in an artificial environment.
Correct, and we're exploring this deeply on the summit with Dr. Gaetan Chevalier from the Earthing Institute, and it's a fascinating subject. And who would have thought, like 50 years ago or 100 years ago, that he was going to say, yeah, we've got this new technology out, it's amazing, and it really boosts your energy and makes you feel great and detoxes and does all these things. And yeah, what is it? Oh, you walk barefoot on the earth. Who would have thought it? It's incredible.
Well, it really shows our level of disconnection, unfortunately. But it's so good to reintegrate something like that into your life. Costs nothing.
It does, and because this technology is particularly the cell phones is so seductive, isn't it? And it's the wireless is just so it's so easy and handy, and it's really
definitely a love-hate relationship, because for me to travel as much as I do and yet interact with clients just like we're doing today from other areas of the world, that's really wonderful. So I don't know that I want to give that up, but unfortunately it comes with a price.
It does, and we need to be aware of those dangers, and I don't think anybody wants to give it. I don't want to give it up, being able to travel and do things and communicate, around the world, and use this technology. But we can use this technology. I mean, when I travel, I use Wi-Fi because I have to. Because now, finding accommodation where there's no Wi-Fi, forget it.
Well, at home I use not Wi-Fi. At home I actually use the plug-in cable, so that's an option.
And that is it. Is really doing what you can in your own environment, which your own sphere, supposed to speak, which you can determine exactly what you do, and then when you go out of that sphere, then you do what you can do, for a short period of time, for a few days or a few weeks or whatever. But I'd like to just explore a little bit more about detox, just to get clear on why I think most people now kind of have got some understanding, have heard the word, detoxification. It's certainly not mainstream by any means, but there is, a certain growing awareness of this. And these different frequencies, these man-made frequencies, these electromagnetic fields, they are a form of toxin. And so that's, another reason to detox. And, we're not saying it's all about electromagnetic fields, but we are saying that it is a major toxin, and it's a growing toxin. So if you could just maybe, so you talked about the vegetable there, to the root, as a form of detox. Could you just develop on that a little bit, about how we can, why it's important to detox, and how we detox in our body?
That is, and that's a big topic. So we'll just do a little piece on that right now. And that term is being so abused and overused. And so many things are being sold as something that detoxes the system when it really doesn't. And to even be able to test if you are detoxing a system, sometimes there's a way. For instance, if you get a blood test and you have elevated liver enzymes, there's a clue, because who does the detoxing in your body? That we know. The liver, the kidneys, the lymphatic system, and the skin. Those are some of the biggest organs that are set up by, if you believe in God, or nature, or coincidence, whatever you believe in, but their job is specifically to take substances, break them down. There's phases. One's called phase 1 detoxification, phase 2. In the phase 1 system, which is set up by nature, these toxins things created by the electromagnetic field, such as free radicals, food, because you're not eating correctly, stuff that's created by too much worry and by too much sitting. Those are some of the biggest things that make us need to detox. So these liver enzymes actually come up to the toxic compound and break them apart and then put them back together. That's called phase 2. It's called conjugation. The whole purpose of it is getting some stuff that's more soluble, the body's intelligence, so we can get it out. How do we get it out? Usually through the urine, through the stool, or through sweat, and also through breathing to a lesser extent. So any kind of exchange organ that can get stuff, throw it out of the body. That's how it works. So by up-regulating these pathways, which we do know how to do scientifically, then we're helping and can even measure the outcome of these detoxification processes. So there are specific herbs that are known to do that. Yellow dock root is one that I brought up already. We talked about it. Another very, very good one is milk thistle. Also, picrorhiza. Picrorhiza is a less used but really heavy duty and powerful detoxification agent. So other things that are change your diet, even if you do it for 10 days. Use a juicer, but do bitter juice, not just carrot juice, which is too high in sugar. So you may want to work with a healthcare provider who is knowledgeable. In my book called Arthritis, I have a very, very complete 2 full chapters on detoxification. Why? Because if we have inflammation, which leads to every illness, including arthritis, we're not going to get rid of that with pharmaceuticals, which do nothing but suppress the symptoms. They may be helpful for the pain, but if you want to stop that breakdown process, you have to do detoxification. And so we described a full regimen, such as skin brushing, where you use loofahs and other things to skin brush, going in a spa, like a hot tub and a sauna, doing hot baths, doing steam rooms. There actually is a Dr. Ray in Texas who measured the chemicals that come out in the sweat when you're doing detoxification. So it takes some work. It's not like, oh, I'm going to pop these pills that say detox on them and that's all I have to do. That's kind of a ripoff. It may help a little, but really to do a deep detox means stop what's coming in that's toxic, up-regulate the detoxification pathways, and give all the systems a rest. And that's really how you do a detox.
Yeah. And so on a more general question, so that's the detox, which is a really great explanation of that. But in a more general sense, your nutritional recommendations, if you can give us those, are there foods which we can say are going to mitigate or even or even reverse the effects of EMF damage?
Well, I don't know if that anything's been specifically studied, but certainly anything that has sulfur in it is going to help your body to do this detoxification process. So then we're talking about foods like onions, garlic, wheatgrass juice we talked about, and wheatgrass. And I always find that beets are really, really great because they have so many components in them. And also look at it from the doctrine of signatures. As herbalists, we use the doctrine of signatures, which says things will tell us by how they look what they might be useful for. And if you look at a beet, it has a lot to do with it's round. It has to bring roundness and balance. Also, it's a root vegetable. We're talking about going back to the earth. And also, it's full of blood. For instance, people who aren't used to eating beets, sometimes they run to the emergency room the next day because they think, they're bleeding when they go to the bathroom. No, it has all that really deep, rich blood building components and a lot of the things that will help to release some of these negative effects of the electromagnetic fields. Remember, they are not a nutrient electromagnetic fields, but they create free radical damage because of the change of the vibration in your body, as well as actual damage to cell structures, which they break down, and they've been documented to break down. So some of the foods, how to eat on a daily basis, that's a difficult question, because one thing I do not believe in is that one diet fits all. Because if you look at the ancient healing systems, which I've been studying for 40 years, such as Ayurveda, the science of India, traditional Chinese medicine, Taoist medicine, Native American medicine, or Western herbal medicine, they all have a component in common, and all of that is balance. So not one of those systems say everybody should be a raw food, cold food, no cook, vegan. No one. There's like no evolutionary concept of eating that way all the time, although I do think that can be useful for most people, short-term detoxification. But when we eat that way all the time, even I have seen patients who get into trouble of what we call, let's say, yin deficiency in Chinese medicine, too much coldness, lack of digestive fire, which is called Agni in Ayurvedic medicine. All these themes are found throughout every teaching. If I had to say one diet is absolutely good for most people, most of the time, and of course there's variations, would be something like a Mediterranean diet, which is some cooked food, some raw food, some animal products, a very small amount, about the size of, they say a deck of cards, but I like the inside of your hand, because I bet Lloyd and I would get a different amount. Let's see your amount, Lloyd. Right?
No.
Oh, see, he's going to get a lot more of that. Right. So it's a way to actually just some amount 3 times a week. That's all you need nutritionally, and stuff not overcooked, nothing fried, as close to whole food as you can get, like he is growing in his garden. And I go outside and I am a wild crafter, and I actually pick a lot of the foods I eat on a daily level. That's going to change. It's also going to bring in the concept of seasonality. So that is really natural living and natural eating. But if you are emotionally, psychologically against eating animal products, then it might be a good idea to be a vegan. I'm not, because I actually think vegetables talk to you too. Yeah. And have a higher level consciousness. And I, for many years, had my own homestead in Bisbee, Arizona, when my children were young. And we actually did raise animals, and we did slaughter our own animals, and loved them the whole time. And, I'm not going to say they wanted to be food, but I didn't really find that they objected much more than when you're listening to vegetables, to tell you the truth. But nonetheless, I honor the vegan lifestyle. I'm totally against factory farming, be that vegetables or animals. That's a hara. That should be completely stopped. It's bad for us. It's bad for the electromagnetic field. It's bad for the individual animals. So by bringing all of life back into something closer to walking on the dirt with your feet, with your shoes off, really, I think your food system as well should be that. Pure food, natural food, a lot of raw, lightly steamed, nothing fried. I would say that is truly how I eat. If you open my refrigerator, or my cabinet, there's no packages, no paragraphs. That's a pretty good clue. Paragraph free, no paragraphs. What's a paragraph? That's this list of ingredients, usually mostly toxic. But if you pick something in your garden, Lloyd, it doesn't have a paragraph on it. It's a piece of food. So I would say that's a good general guideline.
And yeah, something something you said earlier, it's all about vibration, isn't it? And when you're growing something in your garden, then it's got a different vibration. It's maybe got your vibration, but it's got a vibration. There's something going on, and the speaking to plants. So maybe you can I'm just intrigued about how you speak to plants, or what the message, the information you get back to plants. How does that work? Do you actually get in communication? How do you get this communication?
Oh, absolutely. And that will be a whole other series, but I'll briefly say, for everyone to learn very quickly what I'm talking about, there's a movie on YouTube, and it was made in 1979, and I know the person who made it. It's called The Secret Life of Plants. and it documents Cleve Baxter, who is the person who developed the lie detector test, and how he started testing plants, finding out that they could read his thoughts. So I would say that's a starting point. More recent information is amazing in terms of what's called the microbiome. People have heard that in terms of the gut-brain communication. Well, there's something called the Wood Wide Web, which goes on with the microbiome of plants, but that's actually found in the roots. So if you want to try communicating with your own vegetables today, Lloyd, when you go outside, and even if that tomato is growing, the tomato is the sex organ of the plant. It's kind of us upside down because it's the fruit, actually called in botany the ovary and, you know, all that stuff. And the seeds are inside, just like an ovary, okay? So that's the fruit of the plant. That's the top of the plant. If you want to communicate with that plant, you want to send your consciousness into the root base, because the root base is more like the brain of the plant world. And not only that, they have been doing really incredible modern research now. And you can find this on PubMed, you know, not even the New Age Journal, about the communication pattern between plants in that underground environment through not so much just the roots, but microorganisms that are attached to the roots that send out signals to the world, the world, let's say the Wood Wide Web, all over the planet. It's really fascinating and a growing field of research. It
is fascinating, and people that are listening, they might be thinking, well, what the heck has this got to do with, you know, electromagnetic fields and EMF protection? But it has a lot to do with it, because health is about balance and harmony, and it's about reconnecting with nature. And
the plants are affected too. The plants are affected by these fields, you know.
Of course, and there have been studies done on this. The plants are affected, animals are affected. Big studies on animals, and there are some quite a lot of plant studies out there as well, and decades actually that these studies have been done. So there is quite a lot of science on this. We're running out of time, but I just want to ask you for a takeaway, because I know you do these eco tours and you visit these indigenous populations. And I guess even these indigenous populations are impacted by these frequencies, because, you know, there's frequencies raining down from outer space now, satellites.
Not only that, even in the middle of, let's say, a jungle area that I have been visiting for 40 years, right? Literally. Those people live in grass shacks, and some of them still do. They never had a phone. We used to have to call ahead to make arrangements to some sister who lived in town, the only phone in town, and call them, and she'd go out and get them, and they'd come back, and we'd call again on Thursday. Now, they all have cell phones.
Yeah.
I don't care where you are. In the middle of the jungle shack, they seem to have cell phones. So there's been a big change.
So what takeaway can you give us from your interaction with these indigenous populations, about how they live? What can we, you know, very, very briefly, what can we learn from them?
Okay, well, one thing I'd just like to share, if anyone wants to get in touch, naturalnurse.com is the place. We do so many trainings, as well as physical trips to indigenous areas, and trips right in your neighborhood too, like in Florida, and we're doing one this week in Old Bethpage, New York, where we go out, gather plants, make them into medicine. But if everybody can not be so afraid either, because we can do what we can politically to stop this, and I think you can call your congressman, but, you know, like I said, sometimes that's an exercise in frustration, but learning what you can do within your own environment to protect yourself, think positive, and not so much worry, because those worrying about it can be worse than the field itself. So there's a balance that has to be there in terms of walking forward into the future.
Excellent. Really, really, really great advice. Dr. Ellen, it's been fascinating talking to you. Could you just remind people where they can learn more about what you do?
Yeah, well, I would say come to naturalnurse.com. I have thousands of free podcasts, because we do hours and hours a week of podcasts, and have since the 1980s. And now, of course, it's all online. And we've written 15 books, all of which at naturalnurse.com books. I have a free newsletter just to put your email in there, and do a lot of training, like maybe you want to become a certified herbalist. I can help you with that. And I want to thank you so much for the opportunity of being part of this particular webinar series.
Well, thank you, Dr. Ellen, for being part of the EMF Health Summit. It's really been fascinating talking to you today, truly fascinating.
Thank you.
And for all of you who've joined us today, thank you for being part of this movement. Stay tuned for another session. My name is Lloyd Borrell. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.